My future daughter-in-law said she would rather leave the restaurant than sit beside a filthy old farmer like me. My son didn't get angry. He simply placed an envelope in front of her and said, "I was prepared for this. Welcome back to Dad's real-life revenge. Grab yourself a drink, some snacks, make yourself comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories all had every opportunity to do the right thing. They simply chose otherwise." Leave a comment with the number 1 so we can begin the story, and hit the like button because I believe you're going to enjoy this one. My name is Ephraim Vance. I've been farming this land for more than 40 years. I walked through the gleaming glass doors of the finest restaurant in the city. My old leather boots still had a few streaks of dried mud from the farm. My brown wool coat was faded at the elbows. My grey jeans were marked with worn patches. I dressed that way on purpose, not to embarrass anyone. I simply wanted to see the truth. Thaddeus stood up the moment he saw me. He smiled warmly. His eyes were filled with the respect he had always shown me. "Dad, you're here." He walked over and hugged me tightly. My son's warmth eased my heart. But that joy was painfully short-lived. Right beside Thaddeus, Guinevere Thorn stood frozen. She was wearing an expensive black evening gown. Diamond earrings sparkled beneath the crystal chandelier. Guinevere looked me up and down. Her eyes swept over my mud-stained boots, as though she had just spotted a piece of trash that had fallen off a garbage truck. The forced smile on her lips disappeared instantly. In its place was undisguised disgust. She grabbed Thaddeus by the sleeve. She pulled him aside. Guinevere whispered. She thought she was speaking quietly enough, but a distance of less than 3 meters was not enough to hide an insult. Her voice was as sharp as a razor blade. "Thaddeus, I'm not sitting next to him." Thaddeus frowned slightly. He looked at her, his voice low, but steady. "He's my father." Guinevere tightened her grip on her expensive handbag. She rolled her eyes. Every bit of her patience was gone. "I know, but he looks like he just walked out of a livestock barn. My parents' friends are about to arrive. I don't want them thinking my family is having dinner with some poor old farmer." I stood still. My weathered hands tightened slightly. These very hands had gripped a tractor for 16 hours a day. These very hands had turned every patch of soil and planted every seed so I could afford to send Thaddeus to the most expensive university in this country. I wasn't angry. I only felt a vast emptiness inside my chest. Disappointment came slowly, but mercilessly. Guinevere had no idea that the poor old farmer she looked down on was actually the owner of the entire piece of land beneath her feet. Thaddeus didn't argue. His eyes darkened. He looked at his fiancée in silence for several seconds. A terrifying silence. Then Thaddeus slowly slipped his hand into the pocket of his suit jacket. He pulled out a thick cream-colored envelope. He placed it on the table covered with a spotless white tablecloth. He looked straight into Guinevere's eyes. "All right, I was prepared for this." Guinevere looked at the envelope. She smiled with satisfaction. She thought Thaddeus was going to ask the staff to seat me at a separate table tucked away in a corner. She thought she had one, but she was wrong. Guinevere had no idea that inside that envelope was neither money nor a wedding gift. It was something that could make the entire future she dreamed of collapse in just a few minutes. Guinevere signaled to a waiter. She pointed toward the farthest corner of the restaurant, right beside the swinging door leading into the kitchen. "Seat him over there. It'll be more convenient for him. He can step outside if he doesn't feel comfortable in a place like this." I looked at the small table beside the kitchen's garbage disposal area. The smell of leftover food and the constant clatter of dishes echoed from behind the doors. I didn't argue. I walked over and slowly took my seat. Thaddeus started to follow me, but I raised my hand, signaling for him to stay where he was. I wanted to see how this entire performance would unfold. Just then, Cordelia Thorn walked in. Guinevere's mother wore an extravagant fur coat. She carried herself with her chin held high, her eyes sweeping across the room, from someone inspecting property for sale. Cordelia stopped at Thaddeus's table. She glanced at me sitting in the corner by the kitchen. Her carefully sculpted eyebrows drew together in contempt. She turned to her daughter and asked, making no effort to hide the sarcasm in her voice, "Is that the man who delivers vegetables to the restaurant?" Guinevere let out a soft laugh, a hollow, artificial laugh. "No, Mom, that's Thaddeus's father." Cordelia paused. The smile on her lips froze. She looked me over once more, from my mud-stained boots to my faded coat. "Oh, Thaddeus never mentioned that his father still works with his hands." I looked her straight in the eye. My voice was calm and clear. There's nothing shameful about making a living with your own hands, ma'am, Cordelia smirked. She smoothed the edge of her fur coat and replied in a cold, cutting voice, "Of course not. As long as everyone understands where they belong." Those words hit me like a bucket of ice water. It wasn't merely contempt. It was class prejudice wrapped in a veneer of polite sophistication. At that very moment, Clementine, the restaurant's senior manager, hurried over. She ignored Cordelia and Guinevere completely. She walked straight to my table and bowed respectfully. "It's an honor to see you again, Mr. Vance." I quickly raised my hand to stop her before she revealed too much. "Just call me Ephraim." Guinevere frowned suspiciously. She looked at Clementine, then back at me. But Cordelia waved it off. She assumed Clementine was simply being courteous to an elderly customer to maintain the restaurant's reputation. Thaddeus was still standing there. He took out the cream-colored envelope and placed it in the center of the Thorn family's table. Guinevere stared at the envelope. Her eyes were filled with curiosity and ambition. "Is that your wedding gift for me?" Thaddeus looked at me. His eyes were as cold as ice. "You could call it a gift, but it's for someone who deserves it. We'll open it once everyone has arrived." The moment Guinevere heard the word gift, her eyes lit up. At that very moment, I knew my son had been right to question her. Guinevere thought Thaddeus was about to send me home. What he was actually planning would humiliate her far more than that. I watched the look of greed in Guinevere's eyes as she waited for the chance to touch the envelope. Memories of years long past suddenly came rushing back into my mind. My wife died when Thaddeus was only 8 years old. I raised him alone through countless hardships on this vast stretch of farmland. Every morning, I woke up at 4 o'clock. I worked until my hands bled in the biting cold of winter. I once sold my favorite pickup truck to pay for his college tuition. When Thaddeus's first business ran into trouble, I quietly mortgaged the largest piece of land on the farm to guarantee his loan. I never told Thaddeus about the scars or the sleepless nights. He only learned the truth years later, when he found the old contracts and read them himself. I remember exactly what Thaddeus said when he was 18. "Dad, one day I'm going to take you away from this farm." That day, I put my arm around his shoulders and replied, "I don't need to leave this place. I just need you to grow up without ever being ashamed of where you came from." Thaddeus did not disappoint me, but tonight, seeing my son sitting beside that arrogant woman, it felt as though someone had driven a knife straight through my heart. I didn't blame Thaddeus for staying silent. This was a plan we had agreed on together. We had to let Guinevere expose her true nature, completely. 3 weeks earlier, Thaddeus had accidentally overheard Guinevere talking to her best friend on the phone. "After the wedding, I'll convince Thaddeus to sell his father's farm. An old man doesn't need to own that much land." Thaddeus had been completely devastated when he told me what he had heard. But I told my son, "Don't reach a conclusion because of a single remark. Give her a chance to make her own choice when she doesn't know we're watching." Sometimes fathers are not afraid of losing money. We are only afraid that our children will give their entire lives to someone who loves nothing except what comes after their name. And what Guinevere did next was far worse than her first remark. Back at the dinner table, the atmosphere began to grow stifling. Guinevere slowly twirled the crystal glass in her hand. She glanced toward me by the kitchen entrance before turning to Thaddeus. "After the wedding, who will inherit your father's farm?" She had already begun calculating my assets while I was still sitting. Thaddeus calmly set his glass of water down on the table. His eyes remained fixed on Guinevere without the slightest change in expression. "Why are you asking that now?" Guinevere smoothed the folds of her dress and smiled, as though it were the most natural question in the world. "I just want everything to be transparent. We need to make long-term financial plans for our family." I stood up and slowly walked over to their table. I looked Guinevere straight in the eye. "I'm still breathing, Miss Thorn. I think it's a little early for you to start dividing up my estate." Guinevere wasn't the least bit embarrassed. She curled her lips into a mocking smile. "Don't misunderstand me. I just think Thaddeus shouldn't have to carry the burden of an old, run-down farm that barely makes any profit." I asked quietly, "Have you ever set foot on my farm?" Guinevere answered with complete confidence, "I don't have to." "Looking at you tonight tells me everything I need to know about that place." Cordelia chimed in again, her tone dripping with condescending generosity. "That's right. After the wedding, we'll help find a suitable retirement home for you. That land should be sold, so the money can be invested in real estate downtown." Guinevere tilted her head toward Thaddeus and delivered her next remark. "After all, He's an only child. What's the point of keeping that barren piece of land? A sharp pain tightened in my chest. I looked her straight in the face. There are things people keep that have nothing to do with money. They're built with sweat and the lifetimes of those who came before us. Guinevere rolled her eyes, making no effort to hide her impatience. She waved her hand as though she was shooing away an annoying fly. Just then, the restaurant's renowned executive chef stepped out. As he walked past the table, he saw me and stopped immediately. To everyone's astonishment, the chef bowed respectfully to me. Guinevere slammed her napkin onto the table. The irritation on her face exploded into open frustration. Why is everyone in this restaurant, from the staff to the executive chef, acting so strangely around you? I answered calmly. Perhaps because farmers like me have to supply produce to someone. Guinevere clenched her teeth. She reached for the cream-colored envelope on the table. But Thaddeus reacted like lightning and pressed her hand down. Not yet, Guinevere. Guinevere jerked her hand away. She believed the envelope contained documents transferring ownership of the farm to her. 3 weeks earlier, my son had overheard a conversation he should never have had to hear. Guinevere thought the envelope contained the deed to the farm. She had no idea that her name appeared inside those papers as well. But not as the heir. Thaddeus slowly pulled another document from the inside pocket of his jacket. It was a prenuptial agreement he had prepared himself. He slid the document across the table toward Guinevere. His voice was cold and unwavering. Before we talk about my father's farm, we need to be transparent about our personal assets before we get married. Guinevere's face changed instantly. She looked at the agreement, then at Thaddeus, her voice trembling with anger. What are you doing? Don't you trust me? Thaddeus answered calmly. If your love has nothing to do with money, a transparent agreement shouldn't change it. Cordelia stood up abruptly. She pointed a finger at Thaddeus, her voice sharp with anger. You've gone too far. My daughter gave up so many wonderful opportunities to agree to marry you. She deserves financial security. I folded my arms and looked Cordelia straight in the eye. What exactly did she give up, ma'am? Cordelia lifted her chin proudly. Real upper-class men. Men who don't have a father working in agriculture. I gave her a bitter smile. So, in your eyes, Thaddeus is nothing more than an investment. Guinevere didn't even deny it. She picked up a pen and personally crossed out several clauses in the agreement. Then she looked at Thaddeus with calculating eyes. I want half of your assets transferred into my name as soon as we're married. If we divorce, I should receive half. And after your father passes away, his farm should be considered part of our marital property. Thaddeus tilted his head slightly. What if my father leaves the entire farm to a charitable foundation instead? Guinevere blurted out a curse. Without thinking for even a second, she answered immediately. Then he's selfish and cruel. The atmosphere around the table froze completely. Her words struck like a blast of icy water. I looked at the woman who was about to become my daughter-in-law. I decided to give her one final test. The farm is going through serious financial trouble. Last season's crop failure left me owing the bank a great deal of money. I may have to ask Thaddeus to guarantee the loan and help repay the debt. Guinevere whipped around to face Thaddeus. She grabbed his hand and spoke in a commanding tone. You need to set boundaries right now. We can't take on an old man's debts just because he's your father. A sharp pain gripped my chest, yet, at the same time, I felt strangely relieved. The answer was now unmistakably clear. I had decided to give Guinevere one last opportunity. It took her less than a minute to destroy it. Thaddeus turned to look at me. There wasn't the slightest trace of hesitation or lingering hope left in his eyes. Dad, I think it's time. Are you sure you want to go through with this? I nodded, my voice calm and steady. Open the envelope. But at that very moment, the restaurant doors swung open. Balthazar Thorn, Guinevere's father, walked in with a group of important business associates. In front of every guest in the restaurant, Guinevere forced Thaddeus to choose between her and me. Balthazar Thorn walked in with 3 men, dressed in expensive suits. Their arrival seemed to brighten the entire corner of the restaurant. Guinevere's expression changed instantly. The calculating look in her eyes disappeared. In its place appeared a radiant, gentle smile. She stood up and walked over to her father. Linking her arm through Balthazar's, she turned to introduce me to the group of distinguished business guests. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Thaddeus' father. He owns a very charming little farm out in the countryside. She deliberately emphasized the words little and charming. She turned me into a pitiful decoration. She wanted to present herself as gracious and magnanimous. One of the business partners smiled politely and turned to me. Mr. Vance, what does your farm primarily produce? Guinevere immediately cut me off before I had the chance to answer. Just a few vegetables and some small livestock. Thaddeus will help him retire soon and sell the place. I looked her straight in the eye. My voice remained calm. I've never asked Thaddeus to do that, and my farm is not for sale. Guinevere clenched her teeth. She stepped closer and leaned toward my ear. Her voice hissed through gritted teeth, overflowing with anger. Could you stop embarrassing me in front of everyone? I replied quietly but firmly. I'm only telling the truth. Guinevere tightened her fists. Her eyes were filled with contempt. The truth is that you simply don't belong here. You're ruining my family's image. She spun toward Clementine, the restaurant manager, who was standing nearby. Pointing at me, Guinevere gave an arrogant command. Move this man into one of the private dining rooms. He doesn't belong in a place this elegant. Clementine looked at Guinevere, then at me. She stood tall and answered with calm determination. Miss Thorn, Mr. Vance has every right to sit wherever he chooses in this restaurant. Guinevere exploded with anger. She shouted loudly enough that several nearby tables turned to look. Do you have any idea who you're talking to? I'm a VIP customer here. Clementine gave her a faint smile. I know exactly who you are, but I think you're the one who doesn't know who you're talking to. The atmosphere in the room became so tense, it was almost suffocating. Guinevere felt her status slipping away in front of her father and his business associates. She turned to Thaddeus. She delivered what she believed was the decisive blow. She wanted to force him to kneel before her. Thaddeus, I'm giving you one last choice. Either he leaves this restaurant immediately, or I cancel both tonight's dinner and our wedding. Balthazar and Cordelia stood with their arms crossed, watching confidently. They were certain Thaddeus would choose their daughter. They believed no successful man would ever choose a poor old farmer over a prestigious future. Thaddeus stood up. He picked up the cream-colored envelope. When the envelope was opened, Guinevere was no longer looking at my boots. She was staring at nothing except her own name on the page. Thaddeus slowly buttoned his suit jacket. He stood up straight. There was no warmth left in his eyes as he looked at Guinevere. The cream-colored envelope rested firmly in his hand. Guinevere lifted her chin, her voice filled with defiance. Either he leaves, or I do. Thaddeus looked at me for a second. Then he turned back to Guinevere. His voice was clear and resolute. I choose my father. Guinevere froze. The arrogant smile vanished from her lips. She stumbled back a step, unable to believe what she had just heard. Are you joking, Thaddeus? Thaddeus shook his head, his voice as cold as ice. No. The only thing I regret is letting my father sit here long enough to listen to you, and your mother insult him. Guinevere panicked. She reached for Thaddeus's sleeve, lowering her voice as she tried to justify herself. I was only thinking about our future. I just wanted to protect your image in front of my father's business associates. Thaddeus pulled his arm away. What image? The image of a successful man who's ashamed of the very father who worked to raise and educate him. Guinevere clenched her teeth, her voice turning sharp. I was planning for both of our futures. Thaddeus looked at her with utter contempt. No, you weren't planning for the future. You were putting a price tag on every person in this room. Thaddeus placed the cream-colored envelope into Guinevere's hands. You wanted to know what our future looks like, didn't you? It's all in there. Guinevere's trembling hands tore open the envelope. She pulled out a thick stack of documents. She began reading the first page. Almost instantly, her expression changed from anger to deathly pale. Her lips trembled uncontrollably. She looked up at me, then back at Thaddeus. This can't be real. Seeing her daughter suddenly panic, Cordelia hurried over. She snatched the documents from Guinevere's hands. After reading just the first few lines, she stood frozen. The expensive handbag slipped from her hand and hit the floor. Balthazar frowned and stepped forward, pulling the papers from his wife's hands. What's in there that's making the two of you act like this? Thaddeus folded his arms across his chest, his voice terrifyingly calm. It's the complete report I hired a private investigative firm to compile over the past month. The pages inside the envelope contained copies of every text message, email, and recorded phone conversation involving Guinevere. She had secretly hired someone to investigate the total value of my family's assets. She and her mother had mapped out a detailed plan to pressure Thaddeus into selling the farm immediately after the wedding. Even worse, in one recorded conversation, Guinevere openly told her best friend that she was willing to divorce Thaddeus after 3 years if she could walk away with half of his assets. Guinevere looked at Thaddeus, her voice trembling. You had me followed. Thaddeus looked straight into her eyes. No, I simply stopped keeping my eyes closed. If you've stayed with us this far, then this story must have caught your interest. Please do us a quick favor, like and subscribe. Leave a comment with the number 5, so I know you've made it this far. And include the name of your beloved city as well. Many people watch without doing that, but it costs you nothing and means a great deal to us. Guinevere panicked and dropped the stack of documents onto the floor. Every one of her dark ambitions had been laid bare. Thaddeus raised his hand, signaling to Clementine. The manager stepped forward. She stood beside me and spoke clearly before every guest, and the entire Thorn family. Ladies and gentlemen, the man Miss Thorn just called a filthy old farmer is not merely the owner of a small farm. Clementine paused for a moment, looking directly at Guinevere. Mr. Ephraim Vance is the sole owner of more than 3,000 acres of integrated farmland. He owns the 3 largest agricultural packing facilities in the state. He's the controlling shareholder of Vance Harvest Group. Clementine gestured around the elegant restaurant, and this 5-star restaurant is built on land owned by his company. Guinevere looked around the room. Everything she had used to judge me, the luxurious setting, the expensive wine, the first-class service, all of it belonged to me. Balthazar Thorn stared at me in disbelief. His hands began to tremble. You're Ephraim Vance of Vance Harvest Group. I looked at him and answered calmly, I'm just Ephraim. Business cards and money don't make my hands any cleaner, and they certainly don't make anyone's heart any kinder. Clementine turned to Guinevere, her voice thick with emotion, filled with pride. 10 years ago, when my family went bankrupt and lost our home, this farmer gave my father a job. He paid my entire college tuition, so I could graduate with a degree in business administration. She looked Guinevere straight in the eye. The man you looked down on helped my family get back on our feet when no one else was willing to stand beside us. Guinevere completely fell apart. She looked at me with fear and regret in her eyes. But it was far too late. Thaddeus pointed to the last page of the documents lying at Guinevere's feet. Read the last page, Guinevere. With trembling hands, Guinevere picked up the paper. It was an official notice ending their engagement. Attached to it was a decision and all access to the shared accounts Thaddeus had previously granted her. Thaddeus held out his hand to give me back the engagement ring. It belonged to my mother. You don't deserve to wear it. Guinevere burst into tears. She rushed toward Thaddeus, grabbing his hand as she pleaded desperately. Thaddeus, I'm sorry. I was just angry when I said those things. I didn't really mean them. I love you, Thaddeus. Thaddeus coldly pulled his hand away. Anyone can misspeak once, but you created an entire plan to profit from my family. Guinevere collapsed onto the floor. She thought losing Thaddeus was the worst thing that could happen to her that night. But Balthazar Thorn had just realized an even more horrifying truth. The Thorn family had come to the restaurant to finalize a multi-million-dollar contract. They had no idea that the man they had just insulted was the only person with the authority to sign it. Balthazar Thorn walked toward me. Every trace of arrogance had vanished from his face. In its place was a pale, submissive expression. The Thorn family's food distribution company was on the verge of bankruptcy. That night, Balthazar had brought several major business partners to the restaurant to negotiate an exclusive supply contract worth millions of dollars. That project was entirely under the authority of Vance Harvest Group. Until then, Balthazar had dealt only with Thaddeus's legal team. He had absolutely no idea that I was the founder and ultimate owner behind the group. Balthazar quickly held out both hands, his voice trembling as he apologized. Mr. Vance, I truly didn't know. This is entirely a misunderstanding caused by the young people. We're adults. We shouldn't let their impulsive emotions affect our business relationship. I looked at his outstretched hands. I made no move to shake them. My voice was ice cold. When your daughter called me a filthy old farmer, you stood there in silence. You didn't think it was a family matter then. Now that your interests are at risk, you call it a misunderstanding. Cordelia hurried over as well, forcing a flattering smile onto her face. Mr. Vance, my daughter is still too young. She doesn't understand how the world works yet. We'll take her home and teach her properly. I looked Cordelia straight in the eye. You taught her very well. Tonight, I saw the full result of your parenting. Beads of sweat formed on Balthazar's forehead. He pleaded, Please, Mr. Vance, this contract is a matter of life and death for our company. I slowly pulled an old fountain pen from my coat pocket. I looked at Balthazar. I'm not cancelling this contract because of a personal grudge. Last week, Vance Harvest's audit team submitted a report to me. Your company has repeatedly exploited its workers, paid unfair wages, and forced small farms into unreasonable contracts. I slipped the pen back into my pocket. A company that looks down on working people has no place doing business with us. I'm rejecting this contract because your business ethics are just as filthy as the way your daughter looked at my boots. The business partners who had accompanied Balthazar immediately turned and walked away. Balthazar stood frozen, realizing that his entire career had just come to an end. Thaddeus walked over to Guinevere. His voice was firm. "Take off the ring." Guinevere broke down in sobs. Trembling, she removed the diamond engagement ring and handed it back to Thaddeus. "Thaddeus, I really do love you." Thaddeus accepted the ring and shook his head bitterly. "You love the life you thought I had, but the man who sacrificed his entire life to give me that life was someone you wouldn't even sit beside." I walked over to Guinevere and left her with one final sentence. "You didn't lose a wealthy family because I was a farmer. You lost it because you believed poor people weren't worthy of respect." Share this story with someone who has ever been looked down on simply because of their job or their appearance. Guinevere and her family walked out of the restaurant in complete humiliation. So, I could have destroyed their company with a single signature, but what I did instead surprised even my own son. The Thorn family quietly walked out of the restaurant in utter humiliation. The room gradually returned to its peaceful atmosphere. The chair beside me was still empty. Thaddeus slowly walked over. He pulled out that empty chair and deliberately sat down right beside me. It was the very seat Guinevere had refused to take. He looked at me, his eyes red with unshed tears. His voice was choked with emotion. "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm sorry I let you endure all of that humiliation." I placed my weathered hand on my son's shoulder. I gently shook my head. "You don't have to apologize for someone else's mistakes, but next time, don't wait until the person you love proves how much they despise your father before you speak up." Thaddeus lowered his head. He held my hand tightly. I looked down at my mud-stained boots. That night, I also had to take an honest look at myself. I admitted to my son, I was wrong, too. I shouldn't have turned this dinner into a test. Sometimes in our search for the truth, we end up hurting the people we love for far too long. Thaddeus looked up at me and gave me a bittersweet smile. The following morning, I decided to use every dollar I had intended as a wedding gift for Thaddeus to establish a scholarship fund instead. The Vance Scholarship Fund would provide college tuition assistance to children from struggling farming families. Thaddeus voluntarily stepped back from part of his responsibilities at the company, so he could personally oversee the foundation. Clementine was appointed executive director of Vance Harvest's new chain of upscale restaurants, Dotus for me. I returned to my old wooden farmhouse. I continued waking up at 4 o'clock every morning. I still wore my faded coat and my mud-stained boots as I headed out to the fields each day. That day, Guinevere refused to sit beside me because she thought I was nothing more than a poor old farmer. But that empty chair taught me a priceless lesson. Never beg someone to sit beside you when they only respect your wallet. Money can buy an elegant dining table, expensive clothes, and a lavish wedding, but it can never buy character or kindness. Watch how someone treats the people they believe have nothing to offer them. That is who they truly are. Your worth does not diminish simply because a blind person fails to see it. Do you think Thaddeus was right to test Guinevere? Or should he have ended the relationship the moment he heard about her plan? Leave your thoughts in the comments. If this story reminded you of someone who was judged solely because of their appearance, share this video with them and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more stories about family, greed, and the truths that only come to light when money enters the picture.